So, a reminder before the lesson begins, make sure you're taking notes and you're listening and watching for the keyword or phrase. Let's get to it. So, today we're going to be talking about identifying and naming the different angles and lines we're going to be using for this unit. So, there's a ton of vocabulary and definitions and possible drawings that we're going to be working on today that have to do with angles and lines. Some of this you might have already learned, and it is a great way to review. So a right angle is an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. Usually you see a drawing that looks like this, and you'll see a little square in the corner. That's referring to the 90-degree angle. Congruent angles, it has the congruent in there, which means equal, so angles with the same measurement. And the way that congruent angles are marked, let's say this angle and this angle, they might not look equal, or they might not look like they have, but they'll have a little hoop like this. These are going to be equal to each other. Vertical angles. So vertical angles are formed by the intersection of two lines, and vertical angles are congruent. So it kind of goes along with our previous vocab. So intersecting lines. So in this case, we have two pairs of congruent angles, and I'm just going to label them. So one pair of congruent angles would be angle 1 and angle 3. And then the second pair of congruent angles would be 4 and 2. Those would be congruent because they're equal, and they're going to be across from each other. Parallel lines are going to be two or more lines that never cross. So parallel lines will never intersect and never cross. A perpendicular line are two lines that form a 90-degree angle. So here's a line, and they both form a 90-degree angle. So you have that little square here representing that 90-degree angle. So perpendicular angles are created by two lines intersecting and forming 90-degree angles. Adjacent angles. So this always throws students off, but they're two angles that are next to each other that share a side and a vertex, a point. So here we have a vertex, and then here's a side in the middle. So this would be adjacent angles, angle 1 and angle 2. They're adjacent, they're next to each other. You can say side by side. Complementary angles are when two or more angles that add up to 90 degrees. So if we have an angle that's 55 degrees and an angle that's 35, these two angles would be complementary because if you add 55 and 35, you're going to get 90. Supplementary angles are going to be two or more angles that add up to 180 degrees. So you have something like 120 degrees, and an angle that's going to be 60 degrees. So 120 plus 60 would give you your 180 degrees. And you could also, remember, a straight line is going to give you 180 degrees. So supplementary angles, if they're like this, these two angles will form a straight line or 180 degrees, and they would be called supplementary. With complementary angles, even if you have a 90-degree angle and you know that there's a split, these two angles are going to be complementary because they would add up to your 90 degrees here. So they could be separate or they could be adjacent. Moving on to angle notation, you usually have the measure of angle 4 look like this as your notation. This is going to equal angle. M is your measurement. And again, this is going to represent the measure of angle 4, the measurement of angle 4. Let's try some guided practice. Okay. For the first one, we want to determine the angle relationships we have. So we have A, B, C, and you want to make sure you're following that in the order that it's written. So A, B, and C are in that order. And A, B, D. So we have those two which are side by side, so you can say that they're adjacent. And if you look at them, they're also creating, I'll do a different color. They're creating a straight line or 180 degrees, so they're supplementary. Adjacent supplementary angles. For angle measure of DBE, and then we have ABC. Okay, so let's try this. These two, if you look, they're kind of creating this X, so they look diagonal from each other, so really they're going to be vertical angles. Okay, so here we're just identifying the relationships. So when we talk about supplementary, they're going to be equal to, or they're going to add up to 180 degrees. Vertical angles, they're congruent, meaning they are going to be equal to each other. So if ABC is 50, I know that angle DBE is going to be 50 as well because they're vertical and they're equal. Along the lines, if I know this is going to create 180 degrees, I need to think of what is going to add to 50 in order to get 180 degrees. And that's giving me 130 degrees. So you can figure out the measurements knowing what they add up to as long as you know another angle or the other angle. All right, so let's look at the second one. So if I have measure of angle A and measure of angle B, I need to figure out what the angle relationships are. So this is going to be a huge hint. This is going to tell me right off the bat that this angle is 90 degrees. So measure of angle B equals 90. And remember, this whole thing, or these two angles, are going to add up to 180 degrees. So 90 plus measure of angle A is going to equal 180 degrees. And you can just treat this as a variable if you want, and say minus 90 on both sides. Measure of angle A is going to be 90 degrees. which is the same as measure of angle B. Make sure you're checking your work. Make sure you're checking the keyword and the phrase or the phrase. Make sure you're writing down your questions, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.